Jane Morrice is my name, and I'm delighted to be here. And I hadn't intended to have everything planned for this presentation this morning. And I wanted to start by saying that as a child growing up in the 50s and 60s in a trouble-free Belfast, I had big dreams. I wanted to be the first woman Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Somebody beat me to it. So I had to set my sight on other things, and I turned to Europe, and I now wend my way, if you like, between Belfast and Brussels, defending equality here in Belfast, and scrutinising European legislation in Brussels and promoting the European ideal and squeezing a bit of peace building and women's rights through that. I was going to say that I would eventually want to get on to bigger things, but nobody's tapped me on the shoulder. However, I think that that's something that people realise from this audience, that women don't get tapped on the shoulder. Women have to, and my first slide, put their hands up. That was going to be the theme of my presentation today. But something happened. Something big happened. Nelson Mandela died. I think it's worth reflecting a little on his contribution, not just to what he did in the world, but to here in Northern Ireland. I mean, we learnt from him, not just because people in 1997 who were involved in the peace negotiations went to South Africa and talked and heard and listened and learned, but his words. And I'm sure you've heard on the radio this morning, on the TV last night, everything he's been saying and the resonance it has for us in Northern Ireland. And interestingly enough, what he was saying is that he's a man who not only put his hand up, but taught us to put our hands out, to reach out to our enemy. And that's what we learnt, and to talk. So, in his memory, I'd like to talk a little about what we, as a bunch of women in Northern Ireland, did in terms of women and peace to promote the peace process in Northern Ireland. And I talk about a bunch of women, and these were, I'd come across them, and I'm looking out, and I think there might be a few in this audience who, way back in 1996, decided that enough was enough. I'll go into a little bit of the history. Why not? There were plans to hold elections to the first proper, inclusive peace talks in Northern Ireland, 1996. And the aim was to devise a special electoral system that would ensure that smaller parties, the more extreme parties, would get a seat at the negotiating table. I think there are some people may remember those days, 1996. And the announcement was the peace talks would start, and there'd be an election to the peace talks, and we would try and get the smaller extreme parties at the table. A group of women who were in the Northern Ireland Women's European Platform at the time, it was, wrote to the political parties who were presenting themselves and wanted to find out what exactly they were doing to make sure there would be women at the peace talks. I'm the diplomat in the family, and when I say the response in its silence was resounding. I think to be fair, we got one letter back. But it was obvious that was not something that was of any interest to the negotiators. So, these women decided they would call a meeting. And it was the first meeting, and I went along. And we decided to set up a political party. And it turned out that this political party is one of the only women's political parties in the world that ever achieved success at the ballot box. That night, in that first meeting, in April 1996, there were, I would love to say hundreds of women, but no, there were touching 100 perhaps. And every single one of us put our hand up. We had 6 weeks before the elections. And you can't believe the amazing, amazing time. We formed a political party. We climbed lampposts, sticking up posters. We stuck envelopes. We wrote manifestos. We challenged these politicians that all of us had seen on the TV, but very few of us had ever met before. It was scary, scary stuff. An awful lot of us had never been involved in politics before. We'd felt politically homeless. Neither orange nor green, Catholic nor Protestant, unionist, nationalist, British, Irish, all of those things. We felt different. We wanted something different. We wanted peace. And we wanted women involved in politics. And I really only then discovered that the two go hand in hand. So we set up this party, and we had women in it who crossed the divide in every direction. That's the best way to describe it. Catholics, Protestants, atheists, agnostics, and others. And we had card-carrying conservatives and communists, and men as well. And that's something that's very important. I don't think we would have made it without support from men who came out and voted for us in their thousands. In those 6 weeks, we fielded 70 women, amazing women, grannies, aunties, sisters, mothers, and men as well. Not standing, but supporting. And in those 6 weeks, we became the 9th political party in Northern Ireland and got 2 women elected to the peace negotiations. What a time. Thank you. Then, of course, we had the peace talks for almost 2 years. And then roller coaster. The Good Friday Agreement. What a moment. What a moment. Then the referendum, north and south. And by the way, I've got a prop here that the day after the referendum, we were obviously supporting the Yes campaign, both in Ireland North and South, and the day of the Yes vote and the excitement and everything that had happened. Somebody phoned me on the I think it was a Sunday morning, I can't remember, but said, "Have you been to the newsagent yet?" And I said no. And they said, "Well, you better get down and see." And I went down to discover this. Can you see it? Do you recognize me? That's crushed up one there is me. Imagine seeing yourself that size, a full front page of the Observer newspaper, under the headline, "A new people is born this morning." it was scary, well, even scarier than confronting the politicians. This is like help. This is me. I wasn't even elected then, and I hadn't even thought of putting my hand up for election. But I think there was no going back. This was just a random picture, by the way, taken in the crowd of people who were celebrating the referendum, and this was just to say that. But I think I had no choice after that. Yes, I put my hand up and stood for election, and two of us, Monica McWilliams and myself, got elected to the first Northern Ireland Assembly. And to say the rest is history is totally wrong, because that was 5 years of incredibly challenging. I, by the way, also got elected by my peers as Deputy Speaker of that Northern Ireland Assembly. And the first time I took the chair in the Assembly as Deputy Speaker must have been the most difficult 6 hours of my professional career. Trying to calm the waters in a chamber like the Northern Ireland Assembly in the early days. Now, it's wee buns now. But those days, I mean, all I had to keep telling myself was that the war of words that was happening across the floor of the chamber, ghastly, ugly stuff, how they ever dared. I mean, parliamentary language was not there. I won't even go into it, but all I had to always remember was that not to take it personally. Everything was through the chair, and it was far, far better that the war of words was on the floor of that Northern Ireland Assembly than on the streets. And we'd seen it, and we'd felt it, and we'd hated it. And this was change, and this was important. So the Northern Ireland Assembly suspended, and then up and running again, and devolution, and negotiations, and the whole helicopter diplomacy of Blair flying in for negotiations. And by the way, we in the Women's Coalition, we were always last to go in to see the Prime Minister when the big talks had happened. Bring the women in just to see. To be fair, we were always there, and we were always brought in. And I do think that we were able to contribute a bit of common sense to the whole thing. We were able to, because, by the way, I talked about manifestos and envelopes and posters and lampposts, but there was a serious part to what we were doing here, which was about what we believed in and what our principles were. And they were inclusion, equality, and human rights. And that was very easy for us to tick the box by every single policy we ever did to make sure that all three of those issues were there. Inclusion, equality, and human rights. So that made it relatively simple for us when people decided not to talk to each other. We said, bring them in. We got to keep talking. We got to keep dialoguing. And so we were able to dialogue and to pass messages and to do that sort of thing. And another important thing that we really stood for was integration, was, doing more than just showing an interest in our own, each other, sharing. And you're seeing now that this is coming out in documents in government, towards a more sharing community. I wanted to say that what we did back then is bearing fruit now. And I wanted to pick up role models like May Blood and our fight for integrated education, like Mo Molam, of course, and her courage, phenomenal. And like Hillary Clinton was one I wanted to mention, because she has given women, and has in fact given us in Northern Ireland a very vital voice. And whatever she plans to do in the future, I wanted to wish her well. And the last one, I think is going to go up there, is my mum. I wanted to hold her up as a role model. Because one thing, she didn't have an education. She knew what was good for us was packing our bags and getting us out. And we left. Me, my sister, and my brother left. I came back, got involved in politics. And this is where you get to the final bit, which is the gooey bit. Yes, I wanted to do more in her name and for my own son, and contribute in that way, so that when he has kids, if he does, that they can grow up in a trouble-free Northern Ireland just like I did, and have big dreams.